The church is diminished, and I think it's very clear that it is diminishing. Every denomination is in decline in the United States.
Over the past few centuries, the American Christian church has decreased in number. Where once the Christian church championed education by taking part in some of the most renowned colleges, such as Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, and Brown, Christianity has now been cast out of schools on the basis that education cannot encourage anything to do with faith, only reason. Sadly, the Christian church has accepted that reason is for the school systems and faith is for the church. Perhaps this is the reason why 70 to 75% of youth who grew up in church leave the church after high school. That's 3 out of every 4 students. They're not finding within the walls of the church a robust and reasonable defense of the Christian worldview. They're not shown how faith and reason, or faith and science, can be reconciled. But are faith and reason opposites? Are they really at war? As the church pews become progressively empty, are the secular forces in the universities to blame? Or perhaps the blame lies on the shoulders of the church itself. Why has the church diminished?
Thing about people who believe in God. They're idiots.
When it comes to religion, we're not two sides of the same coin, and you don't get to put your unreason up on the same shelf with my reason. Your stuff has to go over there on the shelf with Zeus and Thor and the Kraken. With the stuff that is not evidence-based.
Science is unique in that it does base itself upon evidence rather than upon superstition, upon authority, upon holy books, or upon revelation.
All the discoveries have been made and all the enlightenment that's come to us is from the scientific and the philosophical method, not that of a priori assumptions of faith or the belief that wisdom comes from revelation.
It's very often said that as a person increases in his education, the less likely it is that he will be religious. And the implication of this is, of course, those of you who are religious believers are really dumb.
I think the statistics are that around 75, some have even said up to 80% of the youth that were brought up in the church, once they get into college, leave the church. I think there are many factors there, but I think one of the important factors is that the church has not done a very good job of challenging them intellectually. They go off to college and then their faith is challenged, and they have not been equipped to answer those challenges. And pretty soon they find themselves abandoning the faith because it couldn't hold up to the intellectual scrutiny of a secular institution.
What is faith?
Faith, something that you devote your time, energy into. I mean, I think there's like different levels of faith. You know, I have faith that that tree is going to keep standing next year, but I mean, I don't know if it will or not. Like, I don't know. It's kind of a weird answer.
My definition of faith is like ultimately believing in something that, you know, that you feel like can, you know, come to pass. And
definition of faith.
Well, for me, faith is all about my morals.
I would almost put faith as almost like a byproduct of trust.
Is what people believe in, what they want to believe, to strive for every day, to want
Their
to be
values,
better. Yeah,
their beliefs,
their morals.
I would say it's a non-logical belief system in order for you. Like, I think like people have faith in something so they can assure themselves that like they're on the good track or they're doing the right thing or stuff like this, but I feel it's completely illogical and shouldn't, you know. Being from a scientific person myself, I can only like believe in the things I can understand. So, I like that answer.
I think it's something that you can't see it, but you can feel it. I don't know.
I'm going to talk about faith as a scientist. Faith, to me, means belief in the absence of evidence.
Over the years, the definition of faith has changed. Both the old and the new definitions accept that faith is a strong trust and belief in something. However, the implications of faith have changed. Whereas faith is now defined as strong belief in something that cannot be proved. In other words, faith is not reasonable.
Webster, early on in the 1800s in his dictionary, one of the definitions for faith was to believe in the testimony of another. And I think that's really getting at a good definition of faith. The modern definition of faith is feelings, that I feel, or wishful thinking, or something like that. But if you define faith as believing in the testimony of another, of course the general public believes in the testimony of science and scientists. And so there's an aspect of faith that the scientists want the general public to believe what they are saying. So there's an aspect of faith there. There's also an aspect of faith among the scientific community. They have to believe in cause and effect. They have to believe that the world is rational and that they can understand the world through reason. Those things are not understood by the scientific method, and the scientific method is another one that they have to believe in by faith, that this will actually lead to truth. The scientific method did not teach them. This is all a part of the things that they have to presume in order to do science, and they take these things by faith.
I'm Margaret Wertheim. We tend to think that science and religion are at war with one another. Yet there are people trying to bridge the differences between the two, and some who think that science and religion aren't really in conflict at all. For the past several years, I've been studying and writing about a new movement of scientists and Christian theologians who believe that science and religion can actually support one another. Their goal is to find a balance in their work and in their own hearts between faith and reason.
Is there a connection between faith and reason?
Yeah, I mean, I think people who try to put more reason into their faith they pursue more of the truth.
Yep. Faith in something could be reasonable.
I think faith is pretty reasonable to have, you know. It's like that song by George Michael, Keep the Faith.
Of course. Like if you have faith in winning the lotto, it might happen.
I don't know, I just feel like reasoning in your mind and having faith in something are contrary to each other.
How do we explain the mysteries of life? Science has steadily overturned old religious myths about how all this came to be. Yet those who adhere to Judaism, Christianity, or Islam still prefer to ignore reason and have faith in their forever unprovable, omniscient Creator.
When you say faith is rational and evidence-based, I mean, if that were true, it wouldn't need to be faith, would it? I mean, if there were evidence for it, why would you need to call it faith? You'd say just evidence. And when you said that faith in relativity, in Einstein's theory of relativity, is evidence-based, that of course it is. But the evidence is all important. I mean, Einstein's predictions fit in with observed fact and with a whole body of theory, whereas we only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
No, not at all. I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that? On
Yes,
which you
plenty.
base it? Yes.
Plenty of evidence.
This question of the relationship of faith to reason is one that one comes up against all the time. And the question is often put as if faith and reason were opposed. That, to my mind, is nonsense. It's coupled with an impression that people get that faith is something that occurs only in religious situations and therefore isn't worth talking about. Richard Dawkins talks about faith heads, or roughly equivalent to cloth heads, I suppose, and that reason is associated with science and therefore we take it seriously. Well, that is to make an error in both directions. Firstly, faith and reason walk hand in hand in both science and theology.
As a scientist, I'm increasingly worried about how faith is undermining science. It's something we must resist, because irrational faith is feeding murderous intolerance throughout the world.
In the modern context, we have people saying, well, the scientists, we have reason, and you Christians, you have faith, and those are two opposite things. But the problem is that when you examine the position of scientists, there are a lot of things that they take on faith. For instance, the non-existence of God. That's something that they haven't proved, they haven't tested scientifically, they haven't come to that conclusion. They have a faith commitment that there is no God and that everything has to have a natural explanation. So somebody to say to me that we have reason and you have faith and those are opposites, I would say to them, just like Alvin Plantinga is well known, it used to be called the Grand Rapids Crusher, but it's also known as the so's your old man argument. And that is that if you say that we have faith, we can turn around and say, but you have just as much commitment, faith commitment as we do. You have faith in the non-existence of God, something you haven't proved, just like we have faith that God does exist. Both are faith commitments.
Connection between faith and reason, I think, is actually a complicated one. Faith is not unreasonable, in the sense that if something makes no sense, it will not be a part of faith. Or to put it another way, faith, Christian faith, is not going to embrace contradictory beliefs.
The line between faith and reason is not so clear-cut that the general public thinks it is. There are people who do science, they have faith in their method, they have faith in the testimony of other scientists. I mean, think about this. Very few scientists have done the experiment for water. Very few scientists have done the physical experiment to see that water is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Now, why do they believe it? Well, not because they did the experiment themselves. They believe it because they either read it in a textbook or they were told by a professor. And so they believe that testimony. They take that on faith.
They have faith in common with every other scientist who ever lived in the rational intelligibility of the universe. Their science doesn't give them that. As my teacher of quantum physics at Cambridge points out in many of his books, Sir John Polkinghorne, physics is powerless, he says, to explain its faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe. Why is that? Because in order to do any physics, you must believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe. Now here comes the major irony. The atheists claim they don't have faith. Oh yes, they do, in their science, in the rational intelligibility of the universe. But half a minute, where's the evidence that that faith is justified? In their worldview, it doesn't exist, because their worldview is that human intelligence is simply the product of a mindless, unguided process. But if that's the case, why on earth would you give it any credence whatsoever?
Faith and reason are not opposites. They're often companions and friends. It just depends on where you start, what your presupposition is, what your faith commitment is, and then you reason from there. And every worldview does that. When we talk about faith and reason, oftentimes the suppression of what we know to be true will ultimately lead people to irrationalism. After a while, we realize that based upon the person's presupposition, they reason from that. And everybody has their own presuppositions and worldviews. After a while, you say, well, wait a minute, this person reasons this way, comes to this conclusion. This person is using reason from this presupposition. And they're coming to different conclusions. And that which brings us to postmodernism that says, well, there is no truth then. There is no ultimate reality. It's just all in our heads, and it all depends on each person's perspective.
I do think there is a connection between postmodernism and a decline in higher education. And it is connected with a denial of objective truth. Right? If you have your truth and I have my truth, if truth is relative, if there is no fixed reality that we can all, as it were, kind of have a shared picture of, then a lot of disciplines that I value are really dead in the water. And ironically, science is also dead in the water, because science is also a discipline, a picture of reality. And if there is no object of reality, then science isn't giving us truth either. Again, a lot of people haven't thought that one through. But I tell my philosophy classes, we do Introduction to Philosophy, and we start off with a discussion of truth and logic. And at the end of that chapter, we say, look, if the answer to this question is there is no truth, that there's your truth and my truth, then we're done. Then the rest of this course really is insignificant. It doesn't matter, because all that we're doing is talking about my opinion and your opinion. There is no truth for us to pursue, and so why bother talking about philosophy of religion? Does God exist? Does God exist for you? Okay, great. Does God exist for me? No. Well, great. You know, you have your truth, I have mine. But other disciplines are in the same boat. Anthropology, sociology, psychology, aesthetics, music. I mean, it's all just a matter of opinion, perspective. So why do we bother? Why come to class if we're not learning anything? Why go to chemistry? Why go to biology if you're not learning anything? I sure hope that nursing students are being taught objective truth. That, you know, this medicine will kill your patient, this medicine won't, therefore give him this medicine and not that medicine. I hope that they're learning objective truth. But again, I do think there is a connection.
So how do we avoid the postmodern trap? How can we decide between differing worldviews? One of the important ways to judge a worldview is its comprehensiveness. Is it comprehensive enough to explain the complexities that we find in the universe? Here's where I believe that the atheists are far more confident than their worldview allows. One of my favorite book titles in my library is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And it's true, I don't. Let me give you a few examples why. If the material universe had a beginning, then the cause cannot be the material universe. How can a chaotic explosion produce order? How did life come from non-life? How did the universe become so fine-tuned that it can support life? How did chance produce the complexity of the human brain? How can human thoughts be reduced to matter? How did both male and female species evolve independently but simultaneously? How can we have the complexity of the DNA code without a code writer? Why do most people believe in good and evil when the universe just really doesn't care? All of these things can be easily explained from a theistic worldview because they all begin in the rational mind of the Creator. If God exists, then there is objective truth, objective goodness, and objective beauty. There is a reason to be educated and a reason to pursue science. In fact, a good many scientists believe in God. I think what the church needs in order to stop its decline and to keep young people from leaving is a revival. And not just a revival of the heart like we've seen in the past, but a revival of the mind. The church needs to show that faith and reason are not at war, but they are the closest of allies. If there is no revival of the mind, the church may not be the only thing to diminish.